You're watching Forsaken Joe. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy the story. Let's begin. I came home early that day, like I usually did, hoping for a quiet moment to regroup. The house felt different when I walked through the door. There was a heaviness to it that I couldn't shake. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't quite place it. As I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. My pulse kicked up a notch. Sarah was in the shower, or at least she was supposed to be. I'd expected to be alone, but there he was, Brad, standing at the counter, leaning against it like he owned the place. His truck was in the driveway, parked in that spot he knew I hated. And there he was, talking to Sarah, like it was a normal Tuesday. Brad looked up as I walked in, his smile a little too wide, a little too smug. "Oh, hey man," he said casually. "We were just talking about you." His eyes flicked to Sarah, then back to me. His tone was all charm, like he wasn't the one who had been in my house when I wasn't supposed to be there, like this wasn't a situation I should have been pissed off about. Sarah stepped into the kitchen just as I was about to say something. She had just gotten out of the shower, wrapped in nothing but a towel, her hair damp and sticking to her neck. She was startled when she saw me standing there, but she quickly brushed it off, flashing a half smile, as if this was all totally fine. "Oh, hey honey," she said, sounding more casual than I'd ever heard her. "Brad was just helping me figure out some things with the remodel. You know, man stuff." I stood there, not sure whether to scream or just leave the room. The tension between the three of us was thick enough to cut with a knife. I couldn't look at Brad, not with the smug look on his face, like he had every right to be there. And I sure as hell couldn't look at Sarah, whose excuse didn't land right with me. Something wasn't adding up. I took a deep breath. "I'll just go grab a drink," I said, my voice sharp despite my efforts to keep it level. "No need to interrupt your man stuff." I didn't wait for either of them to respond. I didn't need to. I turned around, heading for the kitchen's exit, but not before I caught the quick glance they exchanged. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't just a neighbor stopping by. This wasn't about man stuff. There was something bigger at play, something I wasn't seeing yet. But I would. I stepped outside into the cool air, needing a second to steady my nerves. My mind was racing, replaying the events over and over, trying to make sense of what I'd just walked into. Brad, in my house, pretending like everything was normal. Sarah, acting so damn casual about it. I'd been paying attention to her lately. Too much new stuff. Too many late nights. Too much distance. But this felt like a slap in the face. I stayed outside for a few minutes, taking slow, deliberate breaths, trying to get a grip. But there was no shaking it. This was no simple affair. No, this was about more than just betrayal. This was about something bigger. And as much as I hated to admit it, I was starting to realize I had been blind to it. I didn't want to believe it, but my gut told me it was true. There was more than just an affair at play here. There was a plan. And it involved a hell of a lot more than me. As I walked back into the house, I glanced at the door to the kitchen. They were still in there. Brad was probably running his mouth, pretending like everything was fine, but I knew better. I wasn't going to play the fool anymore. Instead of going back in right away, I grabbed my phone and dialed my old friend Mike. We hadn't talked in a while, but I needed to clear my head, needed someone who wasn't wrapped up in this mess. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey man, what's up?" I leaned against the wall, staring out into the yard, the weight of everything I had just walked into sinking in. "I need your advice," I said, my voice low. "I think I've been blind for a while. I don't know what's real anymore." Mike was silent for a second. "What happened?" I glanced back at the door to the kitchen again. I walked in on my wife and my neighbor, Brad. He was in my house, talking to her like it was no big deal. And I'm starting to think there's more going on here than I've been seeing. More than just him screwing around with my wife. It feels bigger. You know what I mean? Mike was quiet again, but I could hear the wheels turning in his head. "Sounds like you need to figure out what's really going on," he said finally. "You know what to do." I knew what he meant. I didn't need him to spell it out for me. But hearing it made it feel more real. I had to dig deeper, find out everything I could, without making a scene. I had to know exactly what I was dealing with before I confronted anyone. "Thanks," I muttered. "I've got some digging to do." I hung up without saying goodbye, slipping my phone back into my pocket. As much as I hated it, Mike was right. I couldn't go in there and confront them without knowing what I was walking into. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a business, an operation, and I was going to find out what role I played in it. The quiet hum of the house felt different as I walked back in. The tension hadn't lifted. It hung in the air, thick and suffocating, like it was waiting for something to break. I walked past the kitchen, glancing at Brad and Sarah. They were still talking, their voices too low for me to hear. But I didn't need to hear them to know what was happening. Whatever they were planning, whatever they had set in motion, I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Instead of barging in, I turned and went upstairs to my office. I sat down at my desk, opening my laptop with purpose. I had a lot of work ahead of me, and I was damn sure going to find out everything I needed to know. I called Mike right after I hung up. My mind was already turning, piecing things together, but I needed to hear his take. He wasn't someone I saw every day anymore, but the guy had a knack for seeing through the bullshit. He'd always been the one who gave it to me straight. He picked up on the first ring. "What's going on, man?" I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't sit still. I hadn't been able to relax for days. "You were right," I said. "This is bigger than just an affair. This is planned, and I think I've been missing something." There was a pause on the other end, then Mike's voice, low. "What do you mean? You talking about Brad?" "Yeah, but it's not just Brad, it's Sarah too. They're talking about our future like it's some kind of business deal." I overheard them, Mike. "They're playing me. And I think I'm just the backup plan, the guy who's safe, comfortable, until something better comes along." "Jesus, man." He let out a breath, but I could hear him thinking. "You sure about this? You've got proof?" "No, not yet. But I'm getting there." I stood up, pacing. I need to figure out what's going on with her work. There's a big contract she's involved in, one that could make a huge difference to a competitor. They're chasing it hard, and I don't think it's a coincidence. "Damn! All right, listen. You need to get a lawyer. Get one now. This shit's bigger than just catching them in bed together." "I know. I'm thinking there's something more to it. There has to be." Mike's voice was sharp now. "You need to get ahead of this. Don't wait for it to blow up in your face." "Yeah, I know, but I'm not going in half-cocked. I'm watching and waiting. I've got to have the right plan before I make a move." "You're going to need more than just proof, man. You're going to need something solid if you're going to bring her down." "I'm working on it." I could feel the heat rising again, the anger bubbling beneath the surface, but I kept it down. "I've got a lot of pieces to put together first." "You need help," Mike said firmly. "Don't be stupid. You're going to need someone who knows what they're doing." "I know." The call ended with a quiet click, and I sank back into my chair, letting out a long breath. Mike was right. I couldn't do this alone. I had to make the right move, but I had to get everything together first. I spent the next few hours researching her company. I wasn't about to jump into anything without knowing the lay of the land. What I found sent a cold chill down my spine. She was working on something big, something that had the potential to cripple her competitors. And if the details were right, it had to be handled delicately. The kind of deal that could destroy careers if it got into the wrong hands. I didn't need to be a genius to realize what was happening. There was no way Brad wasn't involved in this. No way he wasn't using her access for something more than a fling. I rubbed my eyes, then leaned back in my chair, trying to steady my thoughts. My instincts were telling me I was walking into something dangerous, but I had no choice but to follow through. The next step was clear. I needed to play my part in this game, pretend I hadn't noticed anything. I set my phone down and forced myself to walk through the house as if nothing had changed. I didn't want Sarah to see that I was already onto them. I had to keep up the act. When I walked into the kitchen, she was sitting at the counter, sipping her coffee. The way she looked at me was different, like she knew something was up, but she couldn't figure out what. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "How's your morning?" "Good," she said, her voice a little too steady. "You're home early. Everything okay?" "Yeah, just thought I'd get a jump on some things." I leaned against the counter, trying not to look like a guy who was spiraling inside. "How's work?" She hesitated for a second, then shrugged. "Busy. You know how it is." I nodded. "Yeah, I do." The words were a little sharper than I intended, but I forced myself to sound normal. She seemed to pick up on it, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Everything's fine, right?" I stared at her, willing myself not to show what I was thinking. "Yeah, everything's fine." I could feel her shift. almost like she was waiting for me to say more, but I didn't. I couldn't. The rest of the evening was uneventful, and I kept my distance, biding my time. I couldn't make a move yet, not until I had everything lined up. But I knew this much. Sarah wasn't the person I thought she was, and whatever game she and Brad were playing, it wasn't just about an affair. By the time I laid in bed that night, the realization hit me full force. This wasn't just about infidelity or a lost connection. This was bigger. This was a deliberate manipulation. She had been using me, playing her part in something far more dangerous than I could have imagined. And the worst part? I had been blind to it for far too long. I had to get ahead of them, before they got ahead of me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The silence of the house felt like a weight on my chest, pressing down with every breath I took. I kept replaying the conversation I'd overheard, the mocking tone in Sarah's voice, the way she and Brad casually planned their future. One where I wasn't even in the picture. The anger inside me was a slow burn, but it wasn't enough to fuel an explosion yet. I needed to be smarter than that. I waited until Sarah was sound asleep, her soft breaths rising and falling beside me, before I slipped out of bed. The room was dark except for the moonlight streaming in through the window, but I didn't need light to navigate. I was too focused on what I needed to do next. I'd done my homework earlier, digging into her company's dealings, but now it was time to put everything into motion. I needed evidence, something solid that wouldn't just expose the affair, but everything they were up to. I couldn't confront them until I had it all lined up. I moved to the office and started setting things up. I didn't even feel the need to be quiet. If they were going to invade my life, I was going to do the same to theirs. I pulled out the hidden cameras, voice recorders, and the spare equipment I'd been storing for a moment like this. As I worked, my mind raced, replaying every interaction I'd had with Sarah over the years. She'd always been smart, always 2 steps ahead. But now I had to outsmart her, outsmart both of them. First, I installed the cameras in the living room and kitchen, places where we spent most of our time. I placed a voice recorder near the bookshelf, just out of sight, where they might stand. It would capture their conversations. There was no way I could let them slip up without getting it all on tape. Next, I turned my attention to Sarah's phone. I'd gotten pretty good with tech over the years, another skill they didn't know I had. It didn't take long to clone her phone. The keyloggers went on the home computer. Every single message, every email she sent would be tracked. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. After I set up everything, I leaned back in the chair, looking at the monitors, letting the reality of the situation sink in. I wasn't just a husband betrayed anymore. I was the one with the power now. I had control. I'd acted like the wounded husband to buy time. But that was over. I couldn't keep pretending. But I couldn't make my move yet either. I needed patience. The real game was about to begin. I stayed in the office for a while longer, making sure everything was in place, making sure nothing had been missed. The silence in the house was almost deafening. It felt like I was playing a part in a drama, one where everyone else was still acting, and I was the only one who knew the script. When I finally went back to bed, Sarah was still asleep, her face soft and unaware. I didn't know how much longer I could keep up the charade, but tonight, it had to be done. I couldn't afford to rush. The investigation, the recordings, the tech, I had to let it all play out. But soon, I'd have everything. Soon, I'd know exactly how deep this went. I woke up the next morning, feeling a strange calm that I hadn't had in a long time. Sarah was already up, humming as she made coffee in the kitchen. I went through the motions of getting ready for the day. I acted like nothing had changed. She smiled at me when I walked in. "You okay?" "You seem a little off last night." I gave her the same smile back. "Just tired." Nothing to worry about. The lies felt different now. I could say the words, but they didn't feel like they belonged to me anymore. I was getting too close to the truth to keep playing their game. She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't push it. Instead, she started talking about a work project, her voice a little too casual, like she was trying to distract me. I played along, even though I could feel the weight of the secret sitting heavily between us. As the day went on, I kept my distance, pretending like I was still the clueless husband, just going through the motions. But in my head, I was calculating the next steps. I had everything I needed. I just had to wait for the right moment. Brad would slip up. He always did. And when he did, I'd be ready. The meeting with the lawyer hit me hard. She was sharp, practical, and no nonsense. Everything I needed right now. Her office smelled of expensive leather and polished wood, but her eyes cut through me like she already knew how far I was willing to go. "So, what exactly are we dealing with here?" she asked, leaning back in her chair, her fingers steepled in front of her. The woman didn't waste time. I took a deep breath and laid it all out. The affair, the recordings, everything I'd uncovered so far. I told her about Sarah's work, the potential for insider trading, the bigger scheme I suspected. I didn't leave anything out. The woman needed to know everything if I was going to have a chance. She listened carefully, her eyes narrowing as I spoke. "Sounds like you've got a lot of solid evidence," she said, tapping her pen on the desk. "But it's not enough. You can't just rely on these recordings. You'll need something more concrete, something official. We'll need paper trails, financial documents. If we can get those, then we've got something we can use in court and possibly with the authorities." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. "I've got access to her company's records, but I don't want to do anything too risky. I don't want to blow this before we're ready." "Smart," she said with a small smile. "I'd suggest you keep it clean. Let me handle getting the authorities involved when we're ready to drop the hammer. Until then, you gather the financial evidence. You'll need it." I thought about how much I hated waiting, hated being on the sidelines, but she was right. I couldn't rush this. I had to wait for the perfect moment. The conversation shifted toward my divorce. She explained how Sarah's financial misconduct could turn the settlement in my favor. "This could change the whole narrative of your divorce," she said, her tone turning slightly colder, more businesslike. "If there's enough evidence of wrongdoing, you could end up with the house, assets, everything. That's a leverage you need." It was a lot to take in, but I didn't have time to sit and process it all. As she talked about strategy, I felt the rage bubbling up again, but I kept it in check. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. After the meeting, I hired a ruthless divorce attorney. His reputation was well known, and after one brief conversation, I knew he was the right man for the job. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He gave me a plan, and I followed it to the letter. That night, as I sat in my office, staring at my computer, I realized how far I'd come since I first suspected something was off. The days of second-guessing myself, of wondering if I was overreacting, were over. I was on a mission now, and I wasn't going to let anything stop me. The next few days were a blur, gathering documents, putting together the puzzle pieces of Sarah's financial life. I was careful not to raise any suspicions, playing the part of the betrayed husband. I even agreed to couples counseling, a move that seemed to put Sarah at ease. But I wasn't there to fix things. I was there to gather more evidence, to understand exactly how deep her betrayal ran. Every conversation we had was pointed, with her dropping hints that Brad understood her ambition, that he was the only one who really got her. Each new statement was another piece of the puzzle. I was hearing it all now. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The affair wasn't just about her cheating. It was about control, power, and money. One day, an email from her company arrived, shaking her to the core. The subject was a company audit, and I could see the panic flash across her face when she opened it. I acted oblivious, playing the concerned husband. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to sound innocent. She didn't even look at me as she closed the email quickly, her hands shaking. "Nothing," she said, her voice tight. "Just some routine stuff." Nothing to worry about. I knew it was a lie. The walls were starting to close in on her, and she didn't even know it yet. But I had to keep playing it cool, let her think she still had control. I wasn't ready to make my move. Behind the scenes, the investigation was tightening around them. My lawyer was already in touch with the authorities, quietly collecting evidence. We were waiting for the moment when everything would align, when we could take them down for good. I wasn't going to rush this, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation growing inside me. The pieces were falling into place, and soon enough, I'd have everything I needed to bring this all to an end. I just had to stay patient a little longer. I spent the next few days keeping up appearances, but inside, it felt like everything was slowly unraveling. I went to work, came home at my usual time, and acted like the wounded husband, playing my role perfectly. Every time I walked in the door, I kept my eyes open, my senses sharper than ever. Sarah was still doing her best to keep up the facade. She had even suggested couples counseling, which, of course, I agreed to. I didn't want her to get suspicious. I needed to buy time. One evening, as we sat across from each other in the living room, she casually brought it up. "You know," she said, swirling her wine glass, "Brad really understands my ambition. He's been so supportive of me lately. He gets what I want in life. It's nice to have someone who gets it. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was getting more comfortable with her lies, more brazen. Every time she spoke like that, I could hear the subtle shift, like she was trying to convince herself that I wasn't the man she needed anymore. That Brad was the one who understood her, who saw her for what she truly was. I nodded slowly, trying to keep the calm mask on my face. "I'm glad he's been there for you," I said, keeping my tone neutral. But it wasn't just Brad's presence that was bothering me. It was the way she spoke about him, the way she justified him. Every new comment she made about him, about their connection, only cemented the fact that she had already moved on in her mind. And I was still here, trying to make sense of all of it, trying to keep my family intact, even though she'd already broken it apart. The next day, something happened that rattled her. I knew it before she did. An email from her company's internal audit team landed in her inbox, and when she saw it, her face went white. I played dumb, acting like I had no idea what it was. "What's wrong?" I asked, pretending to be concerned. She closed the laptop quickly, her hand trembling as she did so. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "Just some routine stuff." I didn't push it. She'd lied to me before, and I wasn't about to make her more defensive than she already was. But I could tell this wasn't just a routine check. The walls were closing in on her, and she knew it. But I stayed calm. I had a plan, and I was sticking to it. That evening, I headed out for a quiet drink with a few colleagues from work, giving Sarah some space. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I had to keep up the act, and I needed her to keep trusting me. When I got home later, Sarah was already in bed. I didn't wake her. I just slipped into the office and spent the next few hours reviewing everything I'd gathered so far. Her financial records, her emails, the tapes. There was more to uncover, but I needed a break. I couldn't let this consume me every waking moment. Not yet. The next morning, I woke up before she did. As I got ready, I let my mind wander to the future. I had everything lined up. Documents, recordings, evidence. I was ready to make my move, but I needed to be certain I had all the pieces in place. I kept playing my part. At breakfast, I smiled and made small talk, but inside, I was already planning the next steps. There were still more conversations to catch, more details to confirm. But the investigation was getting closer, and the more I waited, the more I felt like I was finally in control. That afternoon, Sarah had to leave for a meeting with her boss, and Brad didn't show up until later in the evening, like clockwork. I was sitting on the porch, pretending to read through some old notes, but really, I was watching the driveway. The moment Brad's truck rolled in, my heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen him in a few days, but I knew he was still in the background, orchestrating whatever plan they had in motion. He walked up to the front door, just like he had before, smug, overly confident, and casual. I couldn't wait for him to make his move. The trap was set. As the night wore on, I stayed in the house, pretending to be lost in my thoughts. I heard them talking in the kitchen, laughing a little too loudly, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was rehearsed. She was starting to get careless, slipping into the rhythm of deceit. Brad was moving in, slowly but surely. And then I heard the conversation that confirmed everything. I didn't mean to overhear it, but it was inevitable. Brad was speaking in a low voice, his words cutting through the walls, just loud enough for me to catch a snippet of what they were discussing. It was about the information she had access to at her job, and they were talking about selling it. "Once we get the offshore account set up, we can move the money without anyone knowing," Brad's voice said, clear as day. Sarah's voice followed, a little more hesitant but still sure of herself. "And once we're out of here, we disappear. We won't need to worry about anything anymore." I froze. The reality of it hit me like a sledgehammer. This wasn't just an affair. This was about money laundering. This was about betraying me, my business, my trust. I didn't need to hear anything more. I stood up from the chair, my mind made up. I had what I needed, and I was going to bring this all to a head. But I had to be careful. The investigation needed to unfold properly. I couldn't let them know I was onto them just yet. The trap was set, and now it was time to move forward. The walls were closing in on Sarah and Brad, and soon enough, I'd have all the proof I needed to take them down. The day the email came was the day everything started to collapse. I was sitting at my desk, pretending to work, when I saw Sarah's phone light up across the room. It buzzed once, then again, and I saw her eyes flick to the screen for just a second before she snatched it up, swiping it away as quickly as she could. I knew something was up. The audit email had hit her like a brick. The tension in the air between us had grown thicker, and it was getting harder to pretend like nothing was wrong. I watched her go through the motions that evening. She was on edge, picking at her food, staring at her phone a little too often. At one point, she even tried to bring up a random story from work, but her voice was shaky. It was obvious she wasn't focusing on me. She was focused on whatever the hell was about to go down. "Everything okay?" I asked, playing my part. "You look like you're a million miles away." Her smile was tight. "It's just work stuff. Don't worry about it." But the worry was already there. It was all over her face, even though she tried to mask it. And then, later that night, I overheard the conversation that sealed it. I was in the living room, pretending to watch TV when I heard her talking to Brad. I knew Brad would be over soon. He always was. The air was thick with tension even before I heard him. The door creaked open, and I heard their voices drift from the hallway. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," Sarah said, her voice quieter now, almost panicked. Brad's voice was calm, smooth, like he was used to controlling the conversation. "Just stay calm," he said. "We've covered our tracks. This audit is just a hiccup, but if they dig any deeper—" "They won't," Brad interrupted. "Trust me. We've set up the accounts, moved the money, everything's been wiped. The only thing left to do is wait for the fallout to settle, and then we disappear." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. They were talking about moving money, about hiding everything before it came crashing down. They'd done this in the shadows, using my own home as a base, and I'd been blind to it all. But now I had the proof. I had everything I needed. Brad's voice dropped a little, almost conspiratorial. "Once the money is offshore, once we're out of here, no one will ever know what hit them." I stood up from my chair, unable to stay still. My hands were shaking, but I kept my breath steady. This wasn't just about infidelity, it was much worse. This was fraud, money laundering, a conspiracy between my wife and my neighbor. And I was sitting on the edge of all of it. I stayed hidden for a moment, letting their conversation play out. I had to. I had to make sure I had it all on tape. This was the final piece I needed to close the door on them, to trap them both. But when they started talking about disappearing, I knew it was time to make my move. I left the living room quietly, making sure not to make a sound. In the hallway, I picked up my phone and dialed the prosecutor's office. I didn't know if it was too soon, but I couldn't wait anymore. This was bigger than I could handle alone. I was on the phone with the prosecutor for what felt like forever, explaining everything I'd uncovered: the financial fraud, the offshore accounts, the movement of money, the recordings, the emails. I didn't hold back, didn't gloss over anything. "Sounds like you've got a lot on your hands," the prosecutor said when I was done. "This is big and it's moving fast. But you're right. If they're using your house as a base of operations, we can't wait too long. We'll get the legal warrants ready. We'll need everything you have." I hung up with a sick feeling in my stomach. This wasn't just about getting revenge anymore. This was about stopping them before they could destroy everything I'd built. My business, my reputation, everything. I walked back to the living room, trying to pull myself together. Sarah and Brad were still talking in the other room, but now I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't going to let them think they had the upper hand. I'd seen the truth. I'd watched them plan their escape at my expense, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I kept my voice steady when I walked in. "Hey, Sarah," I said casually. "You might want to check your email." "The audit's been sent out." She looked up at me, her face pale. "What do you mean?" "The company audit," I said, watching her carefully. "You should probably get ahead of it before it gets worse." Her eyes widened, then darted quickly to the door where Brad stood, frozen. I could see the gears turning in her head. The panic was obvious now. She had no idea how much I knew. She had no idea that I'd already contacted law enforcement. "Did you?" she started, but I didn't let her finish. "Did I what?" I replied coolly, letting the silence stretch between us. "I'm just trying to make sure we're both on the same page." Brad stepped forward, his face flushed, his voice thick with panic. "You don't know what you're talking about." I looked at him, really seeing him for the first time. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. And trust me, it's all coming to light. You can't hide forever." I felt Sarah's gaze on me, searching, weighing her options. For the first time, I saw the fear in her eyes. She knew the game was up, but it wasn't over yet. not by a long shot. Everything is going to fall apart, I said, my voice barely a whisper, and I'll be right here to watch it. She didn't respond. Neither of them did. But the silence between us said it all. The walls were coming down, and there was no way out. The moment the door slammed behind Sarah, I felt a strange kind of relief wash over me. The house was quiet, but the air felt different, lighter, somehow. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for the next lie, the next betrayal. It was done. I had watched her break, seen the panic flash across her face when she realized the feds had everything. The recordings, the emails, the proof of everything. Everything they thought they'd kept under wraps. I didn't need to say much. The look on her face said it all. She came home later that night, the desperation in her eyes thick enough to cut with a knife. She was trying to play the victim, like she always had, but I wasn't buying it anymore. "Please," she said, her voice shaking, "you have to understand. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." She stepped closer, but I didn't move. "You know I love you, right?" "This isn't what I wanted." I crossed my arms, staring at her, but I didn't answer immediately. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done being angry. "Don't tell me what you wanted," I said finally. My voice was calm, calm enough that it made her flinch. "This is what you wanted. All of it. The money, the power, the control. You thought you could have both of us, and now you're sitting here, pretending like I'm supposed to feel sorry for you." She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off before she could say anything else. "It's over. I've been recording every conversation, saving every email. I've got everything. Brad's in custody, and you're next." Her face paled, but the tears didn't come. Instead, she just looked at me, her eyes filled with panic and disbelief. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "We were married." "That's supposed to mean something." "Not anymore," I said flatly. "Marriage doesn't protect you when you've been stealing from me, from everyone. You sold us all out for a payday, for a quick fix, and now it's my turn to do what's right." The silence hung between us, thick and suffocating. I had expected her to fight harder, to plead, but she didn't. She just stared at me, wide-eyed, and in that moment, I knew she understood. She understood that the man who had always played along with her lies, who had always been the safe option, was no longer that man. "You're not taking me down like this," she said, her voice hoarse, trying to regain control. "You can't just take everything from me." I shrugged. "I'm not taking anything from you. You took it all yourself." The silence stretched on until she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please don't do this." "We're family." I shook my head. "No, we were family. But you decided you'd rather tear it all apart for a chance at something bigger. So now you're going to have to face the consequences." I let that hang in the air as she stared at me, wide-eyed, her breathing shallow. But the worst was still to come. I took a deep breath and reached into my jacket pocket, pulling out the divorce papers. "Here's the deal," I said, dropping the papers on the table between us. "I've got a lawyer. You've got your own problems now. I'll take everything. The house, the assets. You're going to have to figure out your life, and it's not going to be with me. I don't care what happens after today." "I'm done." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She just stared at me, her face crumpling, but no tears came. There was nothing left to say. It was over. "I'm leaving," she finally managed to say, her voice cold. But she didn't move. She just stood there, like she was waiting for something, waiting for me to change my mind, to say it wasn't really over. But it was. It had been over for a while now. "I've already packed your things," I said, walking to the door, the last of the anger I'd been holding on to, slowly draining out of me. "When you're ready, you can leave." The finality of it all hit me then. The weight I'd been carrying for months, the lie that had been my life, had crumbled. I wasn't the man I was before. I wasn't the same person. I didn't need to be. She said nothing as she walked to the door, her eyes still wild, like she couldn't quite comprehend what was happening. She took one last look at me before she left. It wasn't regret. It was something else, something darker. But it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't her problem anymore. I closed the door behind her and locked it. I didn't feel relief, not yet. But I knew the end was coming, and I had to be ready for what was next, what came after this, after her. There was still work to be done, and the truth was just beginning to take shape. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I was the one in the wrong. I wasn't the one who had broken everything. That was all on her. I walked to the living room, looking at the empty space, the silence, and it felt good. Finally, good. I was up early the next morning, barely sleeping, letting everything settle in. The last 24 hours had been a whirlwind. Sarah was gone, finally. The house was quieter, emptier than it had been in a long time. But I couldn't relax, not yet. I had to keep moving forward. Brad's arrest was the first step, but it wasn't over. It wouldn't be over until everything was wrapped up, until I knew there would be no more lies, no more schemes waiting in the wings. The phone rang just as I was finishing my coffee. It was the prosecutor's office. "Mr. Matthews, we've got a deal on Brad's case," the voice on the other end said, professional, no emotion. "He's agreed to a plea. He's willing to cooperate fully with us in exchange for a reduced sentence." I leaned back in my chair. I had expected this. Brad wasn't stupid. He knew he had nothing left to bargain with, but knowing it was coming didn't make it easier. "Good," I said, my voice flat. "What about Sarah?" "We're still finalizing her case," the prosecutor replied. "She's going to face serious charges, Mr. Matthews. Fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. She's looking at significant prison time, along with heavy restitution." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The relief was there, but it was wrapped in something else. Anger, maybe. Or maybe just resignation. It had to be done. But that didn't make it feel any better. "Thank you," I said, hanging up. The next few days were a blur. I signed off on everything. The house, the business assets, all of it. The divorce settlement was signed, Sarah's part finalized. I wasn't looking for revenge, but I had no sympathy left. After everything, after the betrayal, the lies, the deceit, I was done. I knew the media would catch wind of it eventually. It always did. I'd seen the headlines before, about corporate fraud, insider trading, everything that could ruin a life in an instant. But I wasn't interested in playing the victim. They would try to paint me as the hero, the guy who saved the day. But I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for accolades. I was doing this because I had to. The house felt different after Sarah left. It wasn't just the absence of her presence. It was the space, like I could breathe for the first time in years. But there was more work to do. My business was expanding, and there were people I needed to hire, veterans, people who had served their time and were ready for a fresh start. It was in the middle of one of those networking events that I met Laurel. She was a reporter, sharp, no nonsense. We clicked immediately, talking about the industry, about the way the world spun when you looked at it from the outside. She didn't know the full story at first, but there was something about her, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "I've covered a lot of stories like yours," she said, sitting across from me at one of the bars. "People don't expect it, you know? The quiet ones. They're always underestimated," I chuckled, half-hearted. "I think that's the point. When people underestimate you, they don't see it coming. They don't realize until it's too late." She smiled, and I couldn't help but feel like she was seeing something in me that I hadn't even recognized yet. Maybe she understood what it felt like to be pushed to your limit, only to finally snap and take control. Months later, Laurel moved in. It wasn't rushed, but it wasn't slow either. We took our time, figuring things out. But with every conversation, with every step forward, I felt something else shift. A partnership. A sense of peace I hadn't had before. I had never expected to find anything after everything with Sarah. I didn't think I was looking for anything at all. But Laurel, she wasn't just a distraction. She understood what it meant to rebuild. We talked about betrayal, about justice, about not underestimating quiet people. And in a way, it was like we were both reclaiming something that had been lost. Her past, my past, all of it was in the rearview mirror now. As I sat there, watching Laurel laugh at some ridiculous story I told her, I realized how much had changed. My stores were thriving. The veterans I'd hired had become an integral part of my team. We were all building something better, together. And for the first time, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was what it felt like to move on. Not just from Sarah, but from everything that had held me down before. Because loyalty, once broken, became something else entirely. It became patient, methodical, and unstoppable. And the best part was, I was finally in control of it all. The doorbell rang just after I finished making my second cup of coffee. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I already knew who it was. I walked to the door and opened it slowly. Sarah stood there, looking smaller than I remembered, her eyes tired, hollow even. She wasn't holding anything, no sign of urgency. Just a woman who had lost her grip. For a second, neither of us spoke. She stared at me, like she was waiting for me to say something, anything. But I didn't. I wasn't going to play her game anymore. Finally, she spoke, her voice shaky. I didn't think it would end like this. She glanced down at her hands, then back up to meet my eyes. I thought we could fix things. I really did. I didn't respond immediately. I could see she was struggling to maintain whatever composure she had left. But the truth was, there was nothing left to fix. This wasn't about us anymore. It never had been. I stepped aside and let her in. She entered without saying anything more, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings, like she was looking for some part of her past that she thought might still exist here. I closed the door behind her, the finality of it all sinking in. "I thought you'd forgive me," she said quietly, sitting on the edge of the couch. "I thought maybe you'd see that this wasn't personal." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "It was personal, Sarah. It was always personal." She swallowed hard, her voice thick with regret. "I didn't mean for it to get so out of hand. I never meant for all of this to happen." I let out a breath. "You were playing a game, and you got caught. This is on you, Sarah. All of it." She looked down at her hands again, her lip trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I thought we could start over, that we could go back to what we had." I shook my head. "What we had? That's not real anymore. You sold us out for a future that wasn't even yours to take, for a man who doesn't care about you." Her face twisted, her eyes filling with tears. "It wasn't just about Brad," she said, her voice cracking. "It was about me. About wanting something more. I was so stupid I didn't flinch. I couldn't. You've got it all now. You get to face the consequences, and you don't get to drag me back into your mess." She looked up at me then, really looking. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice low, almost defeated. "You're going to let them lock me up and just walk away?" "No," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not going to walk away. I'm going to make sure you understand what you've done, and I'm going to make sure I never have to deal with you again." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the divorce papers. I placed them on the coffee table between us. She didn't touch them, just stared at them, as if she hadn't already known what was coming. "I know this is hard," I continued, "but you have to go. This is done. This was never about revenge. This is about justice. And I'm done being your punching bag." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her shoulders slumped, her face crumpling as the tears finally spilled over. "I thought I'd be enough for you," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "You were never enough," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "Not once you chose this." There was nothing left to say after that. She looked at me one last time, as if hoping I would change my mind, but I wouldn't. I couldn't. The woman I once knew, the one I thought I loved, was long gone. She had left the moment she decided to betray me. "I'll pack my things," she finally said, standing up. "I'll go. I thought there'd be more to it." "You thought wrong," I replied. She left in silence, moving slowly, like she was walking through a fog. I didn't watch her leave. I couldn't. I heard the door click behind her, and that was it. I stood there for a while, staring at the empty space where she'd been. The house felt even quieter than before, but now it was different. It wasn't empty because of the weight of her absence. It was empty because I was free. I spent the next few hours taking everything out of the house that reminded me of her. The photos, the gifts, everything I'd thought would matter to me in the long run, now just reminders of a life that was never mine to keep. I didn't feel relief. Not yet. But I knew I would. This was the end of the road, and I had made it here without breaking. Later, I sat down at my desk, glancing at the files, the recordings, everything I had built over the past months. The case against her and Brad would be airtight. There was no getting out of it for either of them. But the best part? I didn't need the victory anymore. I didn't need the revenge. What I needed was peace, and I was finally getting it. I reflected on everything that had happened, the betrayal, the lies, the fallout. It all seemed so far removed now. The world felt like it had moved on, and I was ready to move with it. Sarah would serve her time. Brad would take the plea deal. and I would rebuild everything I'd lost, everything she had tried to take from me, on my terms. And in the end, that was the victory. Not revenge, not punishment, just the quiet, patient work of taking back control.